The human stepped into the vast chamber and felt a chill he hadn't expected. He had seen alien architecture before, but nothing quite like this. The walls seemed alive, not in a threatening way, but in the way light traveled across them, bending and folding like liquid glass.
Everything was smooth, curved, and impossibly large, stretching upward beyond what his eyes could measure.
A soft hum vibrated through the floor, gentle but insistent, like the heartbeat of the place itself. He had been summoned without warning, the message only saying, "Your presence is requested." Do not refuse. It was not a threat, but he knew better than to ignore it. Humanity had only recently joined the Galactic Coalition, and even then it was as a minor member. Humans were tolerated, not trusted. This meeting, he guessed, would decide which one of those labels applied. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a throne that seemed to float rather than rest on the floor, was the alien princess. She was tall, taller than any human he had ever seen, with a presence that radiated both elegance and authority. Her skin shimmered faintly, like a pearl in dim light, and her eyes were a strange mixture of violet and gold, catching his gaze and holding it as if she could see not just him, but everything he had ever thought. "Sit," she said, and her voice was soft, melodic, but carried a weight that made him obey immediately. He did, wondering how much of what he knew about diplomacy mattered here. He had studied alien customs, trade laws, and interspecies psychology for years, but nothing in any textbook could prepare him for this. She did not speak as a monarch, not at first. She spoke as someone curious, probing, almost playful, but every word was precise. "Humans are peculiar," she said, tilting her head slightly. "You survive. You expand. Yet you never dominate. Why is that?" The question caught him off guard. He had expected inquiries about Earth, its technology, or the recent conflicts humans had been involved in. But this was different. This was not a question about resources or treaties. This was a question about nature, about the essence of his people. He hesitated. How much could he reveal without sounding boastful? How much could he tell without alarming her? "Because," he began carefully, "we are complicated. We adapt, yes, but not in the same way as other species. We do not seek to dominate unless there is no other choice." The princess smiled faintly, and it was both unsettling and mesmerizing. "Do you think I do not know this?" she asked. "Do you think the Coalition keeps no record of your wars, your victories, your failures? You are not as small as your diplomats would have us believe." He swallowed. Records existed, and she had access to all of them. There was no room for deception here. Every human victory and every mistake had been catalogued, analyzed, and judged by species far older and wiser than his own. "Then why?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. "Why do you continue to play the part of the weak species? Why do you not announce yourselves as a force to be reckoned with?" He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of centuries of human history press down on him. "Because the truth makes empires nervous," he said finally. "Because we have learned that power used carelessly destroys more than it protects. We survive because we are careful, patient, and, when necessary, unpredictable." The princess tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she were weighing his words against the entirety of her knowledge. "Unpredictable," she repeated softly. "Do you realize what that means to the other species?" "To the Coalition?" "Yes," he said. "And that is why we are tolerated." "Until someone forces us otherwise." A long silence followed. The hum of the chamber seemed louder now, as if it too waited for the princess's judgment. Then she leaned back, a gesture that seemed casual but carried the weight of a verdict. "Humans," she said, "are dangerous, not because you have the power to crush your enemies, but because you have the power to endure them." "You are small, fragile, and yet persistent." And persistence, when applied correctly, can change everything. He nodded slowly, unsure if that was a compliment or a warning. "Tell me," she said, her gaze sharpening, "have you ever thought about why you endure? Why you survive when so many species before you have fallen?" He paused, knowing that what he said next would matter more than any trade deal or diplomatic victory. "Because we refuse to give up. We make mistakes, yes. We fail, yes. But we learn. And when we learn, we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. That is why we endure." The princess's lips curved into a smile, one that was both approving and intrigued. "And yet," she said, "you rarely use your endurance to dominate. You wait."
You bide your time. That is unusual.
"It is a choice," he said. "We could conquer if we wanted."
But history teaches us that conquest leaves scars, scars that last generations. We endure so that we can rise again, stronger and wiser, not so that we can leave ruin in our wake. She considered this for a moment, her gaze turning inward, as if seeing not just him, but the entirety of human civilization. Then she leaned forward again, her voice dropping to a softer tone. "Do you fear becoming like us?" He blinked, caught off guard. The question was not about humans, it was about her. About her empire, about the way her people had wielded power for millennia. "We fear," he said slowly, "what any species fears. Losing ourselves in our own strength. Power without restraint is a cage, not a gift. We endure to avoid that cage." Her eyes glimmered with something he could not name. Respect, curiosity, caution, perhaps all three.
"You speak with honesty," she said.
"Few species dare to do that before me. Fewer still, without calculation." He nodded, aware that the entire session so far had been a delicate dance. Every word had to be true, yet measured. Every glance could betray fear or arrogance. He had studied diplomacy, negotiation, and alien psychology, but this was different. This was survival of humanity distilled into conversation. "Why do you tell me this?" she asked suddenly. "What do you hope to gain?" For the first time, he felt the urge to speak not as a diplomat, but as a human. "Understanding," he said finally. "We hope that you see us as we are, not as we appear on paper. We survive, not to dominate, but to endure. And sometimes, endurance is stronger than domination." The princess was silent, her gaze shifting to the windowless walls that seemed to glow with the life of the building itself. Finally, she said, "Then you are honest. That honesty may serve you well, or it may doom you. Time will tell." He nodded, feeling the tension in the room ease just slightly. The interrogation, if it could be called that, was not over. But he had spoken truthfully, and that mattered. In a galaxy of shadows and veils, truth could be the deadliest weapon, or the strongest shield. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe. The princess leaned back once more, her expression unreadable, but her eyes still studying him with quiet fascination. "You may go," she said. "But remember this. The galaxy watches, and sometimes even endurance is noticed by those who believe they are invincible." As he left the chamber, he felt both relief and unease. He had told the truth. That much was certain. But the question now was whether truth was enough to protect humanity, or whether it had merely marked them as something more dangerous than any empire had realized. Outside, the corridor seemed smaller, the air heavier. He thought of Earth, of the fragile alliances humans had built, of the wars they had survived. He thought of the princess, of her questions, and of the weight of the words that hung in the air. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that humanity's story was just beginning. The human walked through the empty corridors of the palace, his steps echoing softly against the polished floors. The walls, which had seemed alive before, now felt like cold, silent witnesses. Every detail of the chamber with the princess replayed in his mind, the shimmer of her skin, the way her eyes seemed to weigh not just him but all of humanity. He had survived the first conversation, but survival, he knew, was only the beginning. Outside the palace, the city pulsed with life. Alien vehicles glided above streets that twisted and folded in impossible patterns. Citizens of many worlds mingled in marketplaces and plazas, their colors, shapes, and movements dizzying to the untrained human eye. Yet among all this alien brilliance, he felt a quiet confidence. Humanity had learned to observe, to adapt, to thrive in worlds far beyond its own. He found a small observation deck overlooking the city. From here, he could see ships arriving and departing, some massive, others small and delicate. Even in this foreign place, human curiosity could not be tamed. He studied the patterns of arrivals, the way ships navigated without colliding, the signals exchanged between them. It all seemed complicated, chaotic, yet there was an underlying order, an order that humans had always been adept at finding. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. His communicator flickered to life. It was a secure message from Earth Command. The words were brief, but their weight pressed on him like a physical force. "You are to report findings immediately. The princess may test our resolve."
Exercise caution.
He nodded, though no one could see him. He understood the subtext. The coalition often tested newcomers. Humans had faced similar tests before, on Earth during interplanetary negotiations, and in conflicts where survival seemed impossible. The question was never if humans could endure. The question was how they would respond. He made his way to the palace's central archive. It was a vast room, stretching beyond what his eyes could see, filled with holographic records, data streams, and knowledge spanning millennia. Here, he would prepare, not for a speech or a report, but for the challenge that he felt creeping closer with every hour, the unspoken test of humanity itself. Hours passed as he scrolled through records analyzing past interactions between humans and other species. Humans were often underestimated, sometimes dismissed as weak or primitive, and yet, every time, they had adapted, survived, and thrived. That adaptability was the core of their strength, though few outside humanity recognized it. A new message appeared on his communicator. "This one was from the princess herself. I wish to see you again."
There are questions that only truth can answer.
There are questions that buys intense. The first meeting had been intense, but this was more.
The first conversation had been a probe. This one would be a test. Still, he felt no fear. Humans had faced threats greater than this, in ways far more direct and dangerous. This was different, yes, but it was nothing they could not handle.
When he arrived at the chamber, the princess was already waiting, her posture relaxed, though her eyes remained sharp.
"You have returned," she said, a note of amusement in her voice.
"I wondered if you would." "I am here," he replied simply. There was no need for more. Both knew the conversation was not casual. "Yesterday you spoke of endurance and restraint," she began. "Tell me, why do you endure rather than dominate? What drives a species so small and fragile to persist against overwhelming odds?"
He took a deep breath.
He had thought about this question for a lifetime, and the answer was simple, though layered. Because we have learned that survival is more than strength. It is strategy, patience, and understanding. It is knowing when to fight, when to retreat, and when to wait for the right moment. Humans endure because we understand the cost of war. We dominate only when all other options are exhausted. The princess considered this, her expression unreadable. "And yet," she said slowly, "other species use their strength without hesitation. They crush and conquer. They win by force. not patience. Why do you not follow the same path? He leaned forward slightly, feeling the weight of history in her gaze. Because we remember, every empire that relied solely on strength fell. Every species that sought dominance without caution left destruction in its wake. We endure so we can survive, not to leave ruin, but to build, to grow, to rise stronger than before. For a moment the chamber was silent, the soft hum of the walls the only sound. Then she asked, "Do you not fear that others will see your restraint as weakness? That they will attack because they assume you cannot fight back?" He smiled faintly, a gesture he had practiced countless times in simulations, and that is their mistake. Humans are not the strongest, but we are persistent, unpredictable, and capable of unity when threatened. We survive because we do not act the way others expect. That is our advantage.
The princess tilted her head, clearly intrigued.
You speak with confidence, yet I sense caution beneath it.
You weigh your words carefully. I've learned that words are powerful, he replied. They can inform, persuade, and sometimes protect. Speaking recklessly can destroy alliances and invite attacks. Humans have learned to speak carefully because we survive by understanding consequences before acting. She leaned back, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. And yet, she said, there is more to you than diplomacy.
I can feel it. Beneath the careful words, beneath the restraint, there is fire.
Determination. Do you not wish to dominate? To show your strength? He shook his head slowly. We do not seek dominance for its own sake. Strength is a tool, not a goal. Humans seek survival, progress, and understanding. When we act decisively, it is because necessity demands it, not because we desire to crush others. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if testing him. Tell me then, if necessity demanded it, if your species were threatened with extinction, would you hold back? His gaze met hers steadily. No, then we would act. We would use every resource, every tactic, every strategy at our disposal. We would fight with ingenuity, with patience, and with unity. Humanity has always survived threats that seemed impossible. We would do so again. The princess studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke softly, almost as if to herself. And that is why I am curious. You are small, fragile, and yet you endure. You could destroy empires if you chose. And yet you wait. You calculate. You survive. Why? Because survival is not just about strength, he said. It is about wisdom. It is about learning from history, from mistakes, from victories and failures alike. Humans endure because we understand that unchecked strength can destroy more than it protects. We act when necessary, not because we desire power. She nodded slowly, and, for the first time, he saw something change in her expression. Respect, perhaps understanding, perhaps even admiration.
You are honest, she said. Few species dare to be honest with me.
Fewer still without calculation. And yet, I sense that your honesty is not simple. It carries weight, experience, and truth. He allowed himself a small breath of relief. He had spoken truthfully, and it had been received, but he knew better than to assume the conversation was over. The princess was curious, yes, but curiosity often led to tests, and tests often led to judgment. Tomorrow, she said finally, we will speak again. There are other questions. Questions that require not just words, but understanding. Prepare yourself. Not all truths are easy to tell, and not all questions are safe to answer. He nodded. I will be ready. As he left the chamber, he felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The princess's questions were more than curiosity. They were probes, measuring the limits of humanity. And in every probe, he saw an opportunity to show that humanity was not weak, that survival was not luck, but but a deliberate choice shaped by centuries of struggle, learning, and adaptation. Outside, the city had grown quiet. Alien lights reflected off surfaces in patterns he could almost decipher. Humans had always been observers, pattern seekers, and learners. This was no different. The galaxy watched, and he knew humanity's story was just beginning, in a way that would change more than just their own fate. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that humanity's greatest power was not strength, firepower, or technology. It was the capacity to endure, to learn, and to act with purpose when the moment demanded it. The next day would bring new questions, new challenges, and perhaps even danger. But he was ready. Humanity had always been ready. And as he looked at the alien city stretching out beneath him, he understood one thing clearly. Endurance alone was not enough. Understanding, preparation, and courage were equally vital. And humanity possessed all three in ways that the galaxy had yet to fully comprehend. The next day began with a quiet tension that no one could name. The human knew something had changed. The city felt different, as if the air itself had thickened, making every sound sharper, every movement heavier. Reports from Earth Command arrived without ceremony. Strange fleet movements had been detected at the edge of the Coalition territory, ships that did not belong to any known member. Their intentions were unclear, but the implication was obvious. The princess summoned him again, this time with no pretense of curiosity. Her chamber, usually a place of calm observation, now held an energy that pressed against the walls themselves. When he entered, she did not rise or smile. Her eyes were focused, calculating, and for the first time, he saw something darker beneath the shimmer of her skin. Concern. "They are coming," she said. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, but there was a sharpness to it that made him sit straighter. "A fleet. Approaching human systems. They believe you are weak. They have miscalculated." He remained quiet for a moment, letting the words sink in. Humans had faced threats before, some far greater than their numbers suggested, but this was not a simple attack. This was a misjudgment that could cost lives, entire worlds, if not handled correctly. "They think they can overwhelm you before you respond," the princess continued. "They believe restraint equals weakness." He nodded slowly. "They are wrong," he said. "They have underestimated us before. They will do so again." Her eyes studied him carefully. "And you will fight?" she asked. "Even now, before provocation is complete?" He shook his head. "Not yet. We will not react out of fear or pride. We will respond with purpose." She raised an eyebrow. "Purpose? That is what humans call strategy, is it not?" "Yes," he said. "But strategy is more than planning. It is patience, observation, and understanding the opponent before acting. That is why humanity endures. That is why we survive." She leaned back, her hands folded over each other, and studied him as if trying to see the future in his expression. "I have watched many species react in panic when faced with the unknown. You do not. Why?" "Because panic does not solve problems," he replied. "It only creates them. Humans calculate, adapt, and act decisively when necessary."
That is our strength. The princess nodded slowly.
"Then show me. Show me why humanity survives when others fall." "If this fleet attacks, I want to see your truth." He left the chamber with the sense of purpose. The reports from the fleet were clear. They were fast, well-armed, and confident. Confidence was their greatest weakness. Humans had long learned that arrogance often blinded opponents to subtle threats. If they believed humanity weak, they would make mistakes. Back at the command center, the human began organizing defenses, not just weapons, but information. Every system the fleet might target was reviewed. Every trade route, every communication channel. Humanity did not have the raw power of the largest empires, but it had networks, patterns, and foresight. That was enough. Hours passed as he coordinated with human allies. They moved quietly, rearranging ships, redirecting resources, and sending subtle warnings to the coalition. At every step, he felt the weight of responsibility, yet he did not falter. Humans had survived impossible odds before, and they would do so again. Then the first scouts arrived, small, fast ships moving with precision and confidence. They expected hesitation. They expected easy victory. Humanity responded, not with brute force, but with ingenuity. Signals were scrambled, navigation routes rerouted, and traps set using the environment itself. The scouts found themselves lost, confused, unable to find targets, and their communications turned against them. The princess observed from the palace balcony, her eyes wide with fascination. "Impressive," she said quietly.
Your species does not fight like others. You confuse, adapt, and strike only when necessary.
"That is unusual."
It is survival, he said, not dominance.
"We do not waste resources or lives unnecessarily. We survive, and we endure." As night fell, the main fleet approached. Larger ships bristling with weapons moved in formation, expecting minimal resistance. Humanity did not respond immediately. Instead, they observed, studied, and predicted. Every move of the enemy was catalogued, analyzed, and countered without direct confrontation. The fleet grew frustrated, their confidence fading as one by one their strategies failed. Finally, when the enemy made a critical mistake, humanity acted. Swiftly, decisively, and with precision. Targeted strikes disabled key systems, not to destroy, but to neutralize. Communications were intercepted, engines disrupted, and supply lines cut. The fleet, which had expected an easy conquest, found itself trapped by its own overconfidence. The princess watched, her expression shifting from curiosity to awe. She had expected humans to resist, yes, but not like this, not with such calm calculation, such patience, such subtle mastery of the battlefield. By the time the sun rose over the alien city, the fleet had been forced to retreat. No human lives were lost unnecessarily, and the enemy had learned a lesson in humility. Humanity had not conquered, yet they had won. The galaxy had taken notice. The human returned to the palace, exhausted but unbroken. The princess awaited him, her eyes bright with unspoken questions.
You did not fight to destroy,
she said. You fought to endure and survive. That is, remarkable. He nodded. That is how humanity survives. Not by overwhelming strength, but by understanding, patience, and action when it is most necessary. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. And yet, if the moment required, you could have destroyed them completely, could you not?
Yes, he said, but destruction is not our goal.
Survival, endurance, and understanding are. The princess leaned back, her gaze distant. Then I see the truth of your words.
Humans are not the strongest, yet you endure. Not the most numerous, yet you adapt.
You could dominate if you chose, yet you wait. That is
frightening and admirable all at once. He allowed himself a small smile, though the weight of responsibility remained. Humanity had survived this test, but he knew it was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, filled with threats, misunderstandings, and challenges beyond imagination. Yet he had no doubt that humanity would meet them, as they always had, with patience, ingenuity, and the quiet strength of those who refuse to be broken. The princess studied him one last time before speaking. Tomorrow there will be more questions, not about survival, but about choice, about why you do what you do. Prepare yourself. Not all truths are easy to reveal, and not all questions can be answered without risk. He nodded, leaving the chamber with a sense of resolve. Humanity had shown its strength, but the journey was far from over. The galaxy watched, and the human knew that every step forward would be a test. Yet, for all the uncertainty, one thing remained clear. Humans endured because they chose to, And in that choice lay a power the universe had yet to fully comprehend. The night was quiet, but the air was thick with possibility. Humanity had survived, and in surviving they had revealed a truth more powerful than any weapon. Intelligence, patience, and unity could defeat arrogance and force alike. As he gazed out over the alien city, he understood that this was only the beginning. The fleet had retreated, yes, but the galaxy was watching. And the choices humanity made next would shape not only their future, but the future of all those around them. And deep inside, he knew that humanity's true strength was not in their ships, weapons, or technology. It was in their ability to endure, to adapt, and to act with purpose. That was the truth the princess had glimpsed, and it was the truth that would carry humanity through challenges far greater than any fleet or empire could pose. Tomorrow the questions would come again. The answers would matter. But tonight, humanity had proven itself, not by conquest, but by survival, ingenuity, and the quiet power of being human.